Ernst Röhm would have been Prince Wilhelm Hohenzollern III. 2020. Then Prince Imperial Adolf Hitler, the Hohenzollerns' older ineligible brother with the same parents, Ernst Röhm, was the twin brother of Adolf's older royal sibling Prince Edmund Hitler the Hohenzollern, born 1886. Prince Edmund was murdered in hospital in 1897. Röhm was stolen at birth by the Brit doctor involved in the birth after being second born of the two, whilst his mother Princess Clara was on pain medication after the birth of Prince Edmund. His theft at birth is likely to be the motive for the existence of the play The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. It is believed to have been a blatant attempt to tease my Hohenzollern royal family about his theft at birth. Ernst was one of Adolf's closest advisors during the election campaign that saw him elected Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Ernst was regularly involved in public events during the election campaign with Adolf and photographed celebrating the election victory with Adolf in 1933. There is plenty of historical photographic material about Ernst's involvement in the German army, where he was disfigured in the face by an artillery explosion during World War I. His life was saved by his helmet. He was openly homosexual, like Adolf, and was in a personal relationship with Hermann Göring at some stage. Other photographic media featuring Ernst on his own were taken in reference to his charity work with what is now the Salvation Army. Ernst dedicated himself to charitable causes after World War I as a response to his experiences in the German army. Ernst Röhm was one of the founders of the modern Salvation Army charity group as we know it today and had a huge following of his own in Germany. The modern Salvation Army logo and uniform is still reminiscent of Ernst Röhm, like a tribute. Röhm did not want to be a public figurehead of the charity, as if official, but him appearing to be was unavoidable. He regularly accepted donations, including from his younger brother Adolf, and was photographed doing administrative work for charity. Ernst Röhm was abducted and murdered sometime after the 1933 election and pronounced dead in 1934. It was a horrible incident, involving him being held captive for a prolonged period, his murder, and terrible mutilation. Insensitive, disrespectful types later referred to the incident as the Night of the Long Knives. The perpetrators called Prince Imperial Adolf to notify him Ernst was dead and asked him to officially identify his body as his listed emergency contact. Prince Imperial and Chancellor Adolf was absolutely horrified. He later gave a speech at a press conference, labeling the crime as one of the worst acts of violent treachery in world history by antisocial and intellectually diseased types, vowing that the perpetrators would be held accountable. Prince Imperial Adolf had donated massive amounts of money to his older brother Ernst's charity work before his death. When Chancellor and Prince Imperial Adolf attended the Berlin Olympics as host head of state, there was regularly an empty chair next to him where Ernst would have been seated. After Kaiser Adolf escaped prisoner of war jail in 1959, he was shown fictitious media material that appeared to be made in Germany. It was shown to him to secretly record his reaction to it and see how it upset him. His life in Italy after he took diplomatic asylum was like being trapped on candid camera. They illegally and secretly recorded everything they could, including behaving as if all normal human moral and emotional behavior was suspended, as if he was an exception to normal social standards. The fictitious material tried to imply he had openly ordered Ernst tortured and murdered himself, as if he feared Ernst was becoming a rival to him, and the concept of him ordering someone murdered was acceptable for him to do publicly as Chancellor and monarch. The content was one of the reasons Kaiser Adolf never returned to Germany to live after his escape in 1959, until his death in 1982, in Yarragon, Gippsland, Australia. The blatant lie that Prince Imperial and Chancellor Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern ordered the murder of his older ineligible brother and closest political confidant Ernst Rohm in 1934 is one of the most pitifully weak, pathetic, and disgustingly offensive fabrications in world history. An insult to the average person's intelligence. Ernst was abducted, held captive, tortured, murdered, and then mutilated with sharp implements by a terrorism group linked to Albert Einstein amongst others. The perpetrators mutilated him to try to make it appear he had been attacked during a homosexual sex act, instead of him attending the place he was attacked on charity work grounds. His younger homosexual brother Adolf was his emergency contact on his personal details and was asked to travel to where Ernst was found dead to identify the body. It was made more horrifically traumatic because of the circumstances of Ernst's death and their close personal friendship. Adolf saw the mutilation of Ernst that had been committed by the offenders, including horrific amounts of blood and Ernst lying face down on the floor. He was then asked to identify Ernst, which involved forensic police having to disturb Ernst's body and roll him over so that Adolf could identify him via his face. After the incident and the less than respectful or sensitive response from people who were not flattering about Ernst's charity work, despite him being a public legend in Germany in his own right, Adolf decided he did not really want to become the constitutional monarch of Germany. Privately Kaiser of my royal Hohenzollern family, maybe. He was openly asked by his predecessor former Kaiser Prince Wilhelm II, who had abdicated to him in November 1918, if he could finally get around to being crowned monarch of Germany, as he wanted to go to the coronation and see it. It was a request made at an official Hohenzollern Christmas dinner in 1938 by Adolf's elderly cousin that Adolf decided not to refuse. He decided to do it for Wilhelm II. Adolf had to announce his coronation 12 months in advance to the public, due to conditions imposed by Wilhelm II in the abdication. Wilhelm II tried to allow people time to recover from the end of World War I before a new monarch was crowned, by specifying a waiting period of a minimum of 6 months between the announcement of the coronation date and the ceremony. Adolf announced his coronation as monarch of Germany would be on the 18th of January, 1940, a year in advance in January 1939. If Wilhelm II had not have asked, it may never have happened. When Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern was in prisoner of war jail in Yugoslavia between December 1943 and 1959, lunatics faked over 6 months of media pretending Adolf ordered his older brother murdered, as if he had started to fear him as a potential political, or even royal, rival. They pretended he gave instructions on how to lure him somewhere, torture him, and then mutilate the body. They then pretended he went to the murder scene and checked if the perpetrators followed his instructions. They faked newspaper front pages and articles, photographs, newsreels, statements, audio, press conferences, documentaries, speeches, law enforcement investigations, private investigation material, the lot. They took advantage of the over 15 years he was missing in prisoner of war jail in Yugoslavia to fake it all, then further refined the fake material. They decided to pretend Adolf claimed responsibility for the crime in a press conference held after Ernst was pronounced dead to the public, and he had identified Ernst's body. They pretended Adolf's descriptive loathing-filled references to the perpetrators of the horrific crime were his descriptive opinion of Ernst instead, and worked from there. They then pretended when asked why he ordered Ernst killed, Adolf gave a speech to Parliament as Chancellor of Government and Monarchy, explaining why he had ordered Röhm killed. As if the concept was perfectly legal. They then pretended everyone said, okay, that's why. Fair enough then. Without so much as a mention of having him arrested, interviewed, or charged, etc. Even though they pretended he admitted to organizing a violent murder. As if people said if the Chancellor of Germany wants to publicly order people killed that's fine, and put it behind them. Germany was a semi-civilized society at the time. Adolf had already been in jail 10 years earlier for 13 months without charges laid or a criminal conviction after the incident now erroneously dubbed the beer hole putsch. He was never placed under investigation or arrested after Ernst's death before his abduction in December 1943. There are actual fake videos on YouTube labeled to imply that Chancellor and Monarchy Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern gave a speech to Parliament explaining why he had ordered his older brother executed. People actually watch them and pretend he could do that without being arrested. If elected political head of state Chancellor and constitutional monarchy head of state Prince Imperial Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern had ever ordered someone executed and admitted it publicly whilst in politics, he would have been arrested, charged, and put on trial for it. Adolf was discharged on medical grounds from the German military during World War I and never re-enlisted. The position of Chancellor and or monarch does not come with the position of ultimate commander or nominal head of the military in Germany. Pretending he had violent terrorist leader-like authority to officially or unofficially order executions and then claim responsibility for it publicly is disgustingly incorrect and offensive fiction. Every so often, 2 years for example, the lunatics responsible for inventing the insane and vulgar material and refining it get together, dress in relevant costumes, film themselves having dinner discussing the 6 months or more of fake media about Ernst's death fabricated after 1945, and add more. They then have it worked up, release it, and expect the public to swallow it as if it's real and a result of investigations by experts. Instead of it being a rolling fictional story people have regularly added to for over 80 years. Their most recent dinner conference to add more fiction to it was in 2022. They released new fake newspaper articles and headlines about it afterwards on specially aged-looking paper designed to look like it was printed in 1934. With headlines and text never seen before, as if it was bonus tracks on a re-release of a song from 1934. In some ways, German society has been held in complete contempt since those lunatics first started pretending Adolf ordered Ernst killed publicly, then pretended he claimed responsibility for Röhm's death being ordered. Then gave a speech to Parliament explaining why, and got away with it and was let govern the country democratically as Chancellor for another 9 years. Including becoming Kaiser in 1940 despite it. If people aren't disgusted about the fictional material, then they hold Germany in contempt for not stopping the fictional lunacy quickly and releasing clarifying facts instead, that are more respectful. Why they tried to show all the faked material to Adolf after he took diplomatic asylum in Italy in 1961 is beyond comprehension. Assuming his number one priority was expecting to walk back into his life as Kaiser after over 15 years in jail without so much as a change of clothes was just an early signal of their lack of grip on reality. They probably planned to show him a lack of charity for his health if he ever escaped, as if it was a valid reaction to his massive investment in charity and healthcare himself in the past. Adolf had already been exposed to the undertow of lunacy at the convent he asked for help from in northeast Italy. The convent priest saw him in serious need of at least medical assistance at the door, then closed it immediately, saying, "Oh. No. That's Kaiser Adolf Hitler, what is he doing here?" Whilst Adolf bashed on the door screaming, "I've got bullet wounds in my back, and blisters on my feet in my concrete shoes. Let me in." Organized crime and terrorism groups like faking that offensive garbage because they pretend the more of it they fake, the more likely they are to be able to do that sort of thing for real, and argue they should get away with it as if it is acceptable behavior. Absolutely contemptibly weak and pathetic. Kaiser Adolf lost all interest in residing in Germany ever again after he was shown the faked material. He never even mentioned the idea after reading some of the fake front pages and newspaper articles and seeing faked video material after being introduced to the television in the 1960s. In truth, he had not gotten that far yet, more concerned about his health than anything else. Germany still seems somehow deserted to some, intellectually or actually, with the ongoing fabrication of Adolf murdering Ernst as one of the main reasons why. People cannot go anywhere there without seeing something that says Kaiser Adolf did not order Ernst Rohm murdered. Put more simply, Ernst Rohm was Adolf's number one hero figure. He was also his found older long-lost brother, as the twin of Prince Edmund who was murdered aged 11. For me personally, the idea of sitting around with already false historical material and spending a few days trying to fill gaps and create more fake material to add to the pile of lies about real historical figures every couple of years is completely incomprehensible. It is a form of insanity manifested in compulsive lies I could never delve into and has no useful purpose. Not telling compulsive lies isn't suffering from a lack of imagination or intelligence. Something is not more imaginative the more lies it includes. Pretending the universe is 50% good, 50% bad in a give and steal split scenario is complete insanity. When it comes to intellectual deserts, alcohol is obviously not the answer or alternative to coping with reality. Neither is radiation emitters used as weapons, blatantly corrupt or colluded sport results, or modern computer-generated media. My voice on everything, for example, has not stolen my valid, realistic, personal opinion. The modern computer being the way to escalate fake history to a new level is not a valid behavioral choice. The worse it gets, the more retardedly implausible they plan to attempt to do. The doomed are worse now than ever. In real time. On daily media. Using fictitious people with computer-generated faces made up of selected images and audio of parts of real people. They sometimes try to transfer it to their own bodies with cosmetic surgery. Television is their biggest weakness. The invention of the camera and sound recording devices, then the technology to manipulate that data towards fictional, has not replaced ancestral family memory history as the basis for our knowledge of our own evolution here on Earth, and never will. Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern was not in the German military after World War I. He was discharged on medical grounds during World War I after being seriously wounded with an early machine gun. He took over 6 years to recover enough to start talking about becoming Kaiser. He swore off participating in the military again after his experiences during World War I. He was head of my Royal Hohenzollern family after being abdicated to in November 1918, until he abdicated to me in 1977. Prince Imperial 1918 to 1940, Kaiser 1940 to 1977, former Kaiser Prince Adolf 1977 to 1982. He won a seat in Parliament in an election in 1933. During the election campaign the Workers' Party started wearing his Now My Royal monogram flag on armbands as a gimmick for the election, which only became visibly prevalent in the 1930s on any large scale. It was also an open statement of support for him ascending to monarch, as he could have by the end of 1920 if he was well enough. He was elected Chancellor of Germany by the Parliament in 1933 during the first sitting days of the new spread. He was Chancellor of Germany until abducted from Berlin and made a prisoner of war in Yugoslavia in December 1943. Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern did not have the authority to order anyone killed when head of my royal family or chancellor. Him being head of my royal family and elected chancellor did not make him an evil dictator. His position in my royal Hohenzollern family was his family and constitutional right after being correctly authorized a prince by his cousin Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1889. Reinforced by him being endorsed a future Kaiser of Germany at age 10 by a referendum on constitutional monarchy in January 1900. He had the right to nominate himself for election to Parliament in 1933 under German law. There were no restrictions banning him from being elected Chancellor because he was in my royal family, also the constitutional monarchy of Germany. Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern did not do anything when he was either or both head of my royal family and Chancellor that could be used as reasoning to ban royalty being elected to Parliament in Germany. Those who claim he did too much good are insane for claiming too much good can be done. He spent around 17 years in jail for nothing in his lifetime and had never been convicted of a criminal offense when he died in 1982. He was clean, for real. Authorities had bizarrely ample time and opportunity to charge and trial him, but never did despite him being illegally detained for nearly 20 of his 93 years. They could have even dabbled with charging him with something he didn't do, trialing him at Nuremberg, pretending to find him guilty and forcing him to serve a jail sentence. But they had already pretended to blame him for nearly everything illegal whilst he was missing, whilst pretending his ineligible cousin Albert Einstein was a famous physicist instead of an abhorrently evil psycho. They had also been pretending New Zealander Isabel Williams was Adolf when found dead in Berlin in 1945 on top of Janet Podolsky, Eva Braun. Lost in fictional flip-flopping. Pretending Germany was lawless at some point isn't good enough. Someone who lived to the age of 93 without ever being convicted of a criminal offense cannot be blamed for everything evil that happened at any point during their lifetime, as if a magic spell. People who pretend I have to make like Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern was evil more than Albert Einstein in behavioral reputation and then hand over my royal family private estate to an ineligible descendant of Einstein as a flip-flop are the worst type of morons. They are the type of moron pretending they are only trying to finish a crime job that didn't get done with an illegally deliberately inbred stolen sperm baby in Einstein's sister in Yugoslavia in 1944. Pretending they are going to steal my assets won't get the reputation swap finished, leaving genocidal torturing moron fake physicist Einstein with my great-grandfather Adolf's reputation as a humanitarian. If you pretend you are trying to complete the swap, you should be in a psychiatric institution, maybe strapped down, or at least sedated. Fictional computer-manipulated media is not replacing directly passed on memory on this planet. Then Prince Imperial Adolf was also horribly ripped off when nominated for Time magazine's Man of the Year in the 1930s after he entrenched himself in the role of Chancellor as well as head of my monarchy. What a rip-off. He eradicated polio, for freak's sake. His deceased brother Ernst Röhm's Salvation Charity Army between World War I and his death in 1934 made Ernst Adolf's absolute hero. There are several pictures of Ernst looking at Adolf thinking, "You okay there, dude? You look like you've lost it or something," when Adolf was awestruck. Ernst was leading his own army of charity workers who paid attention to him. After Ernst's death, he decided he wanted to take on all Ernst's charity endeavors and expand on them. That, combined with Adolf dedicating himself to improving the health of children and eradicating childhood diseases, partially due to what happened to his brother Prince Edmund, make Adolf a powerful force for the good, particularly regarding charitable endeavors and children's health. He was also a regular visiting seriously ill military personnel everywhere he went, when he had time. If he wasn't visiting the over 100 children's hospitals he built himself from his political position. He had been seriously ill for years after being almost fatally wounded by a machine gun during World War I. He had been there himself, going through multiple emergency surgeries, long-term physical rehabilitation. Then even longer-term mental rehabilitation from the trauma involved. With both physical and mental health lapses over 6 long years. He spent as much time as he could with German military personnel in that same situation. Adolf was personally involved in redesigning, manufacturing, and distributing new military clothing and accessories for the German military. He was personally involved in consultation with others in redesigning the gear himself, based on his horrific experiences during World War I and the resources he had on the Western Front. The German military looked like a completely different organization in the specific regard of its clothing and equipment before the start of World War II. He thought if he could prevent some of the trauma he had suffered in some way, if worst came to worst for someone else, then at least he tried. There was so much more. Including hygiene centers throughout Germany, where people could get inspected for minor infections and parasitic infestations, have them treated, and have their clothing and bedding laundered to rid the items of any parasites before they took them home. And of course, his legendary animal conservation reserves and free-range areas. He was personally credited with saving, or protecting from endangered species listing, or extinction, many a struggling animal species during his time before prisoner of war jail. Adolf was very pleasantly invited to pretend to invade nearby countries, like the Netherlands, as long as they filmed some tanks rolling over the fields to look like an invasion. Even though that was not his decision as Chancellor, as he was not in the military because of the role. They invited him in so he could introduce all those programs I already mentioned in those countries. With a meal, tea or coffee, and chats with the military personnel who were filmed rolling in the footage after. He spent as much government and Hohenzollern royal family income as he could on it all. Including the security crackdown that caused the thousands of genuine psychos and life without parole types to be in those maximum security prisons I have already mentioned. The prisons the neo-Nazis took by force after their evil uprising and self-declaration by name in December 1943. The NN's A swastika is 2 capital NS joined in one flowing lettering symbol, immediately took each prison one by one and released all the inmates to join them. It was one of the most horrifically evil heinous crime waves in human history for the following months, resulting in the deaths of millions. Then slowed down to abhorrent until the end of World War II. Homosexuals illegally segregated from the public by the evil neo-Nazi terrorism group were then tortured by the former inmates in the prisons until the end of World War II. All former inmates were made over by a professional production film crew, costumes, makeup, photographers, cinematographers to look like real decent German officials. The millions of German civilians mass murdered by the neo-Nazis with their NN swastika were apparently processed after their deaths using available industrial equipment. There is no easy way to put this. Their bodies were apparently processed into fertilizer and the bones crushed to powder and used in things like concrete. People still hear lunatics talk as if drinking reservoir dam water in Europe is like drinking corpses. They don't mean that there are dead bodies in the dams, which rarely ever get seriously empty. They mean the concrete the dams are made of had crushed mass murder victims' bones added to it. Some of it was found in bizarre stockpiles after World War II, and they decided to use it, because that much concrete powder laying around shouldn't go to waste. Unfortunately, the millions of victims' clothing and family identities were stockpiled and are still in use. People regularly get around in the clothing of German civilians murdered by the neo-Nazis between December 1943 and mid-1945. They, of course, manage it like it is charity shop clothing for use, like a Salvation Army charity thrift shop, but for organized crime and terrorists. I am a regular target for people who wear the clothes to upset, distract and offend, as well as pretend to mesmerize for organized crime to victimize. Mass-murdered German residents killed during neo-Nazi period World War II is still a go-to reserve of identities to illegally source a new family identity from. Then some surgery, clothes, a wig, etc. Some perpetrators of that form of deceased family identity theft then return to the place they originally left in a hurry. The stereotypical organized crime panic bug out. They sometimes move back in again where they were when they bugged out, looking like a whole different person or family with a German-sounding name and matching accent. Move back to places like Queensland. Sometimes into the same street and talking to people who knew them before they bugged out, as if it is hilarious they don't get recognized. Kaiser Wilhelm I had suspected Princess Clara and his second eligible son Prince Alois were going to have twins. He had already discussed naming one Wilhelm III with them if Princess Clara did have twins. Kaiser Wilhelm I did ask them why they didn't call Prince Edmund Wilhelm III anyway when told the new prince's name was Edmund. Wilhelm I was elderly at the time. If Kaiser Wilhelm I thought there would be twins, it explained the casual question, and he was probably a little disappointed, with good reason. There should have been 2 new princes. Pictures of Ernst Rohm have been used to introduce the fiction of a fake princess as Kaiser Wilhelm I's other younger eligible child born after Kaiser Friedrich IV, born 1831. Kaiser Wilhelm I's other eligible child was Prince Alois Hohenzollern, born 1837, who later changed his surname to Hitler when his mother married and became Mrs. Hitler. The fake internet records have a fictitious princess as Kaiser Wilhelm I's other child, an anagram of Alois, Princess Louisa. The images of the fictitious Princess Louisa, daughter of Kaiser Wilhelm I, contain modified images of Ernst Rohm. Revolting and with homophobia or sexual perversion theories at heart. From a family perspective, I am too disgusted to vomit at the for that one.